welcome to AM Live. And this morning, we'll be discussing matters taxation and debt. With me in studio already is Professor Exen Iraki, an economist, and President William Ruto, in the media interview he held on the 4th of January, said that there's only one bullet to the debt situation we find ourselves in, and that is collecting all collectible revenue. I wonder what you have to say on the subject. In fact, he says within the next 24 months, the Kenya Revenue Authority has a target of adding the amount collected in revenue by 1 trillion Kenya shillings. Will that resolve the situation? Is the situation as dire as some have painted? We get into all of that in the course of the next 2 hours. Did I introduce myself? Yes. In case I haven't, again, my name is Olive Burrows. But before we get into that conversation with my panel this morning, let's take a look at the top stories. And NTV has obtained exclusive CCTV footage of the moment 4 police officers reportedly attempted to rob 2 business people of over 2 million shillings along a street in Nairobi. The 4 officers were presented in court to answer to charges of attempted robbery. And with that report is none other than Angina Kirori.
Approximately 11 a.m. Monday morning along Mamangina Street, a busy day for most business people as they prepare for the day ahead. Notice this man in a light jacket and backpack who is on his way from a forex bureau where he works and heading to the bank to deposit money. Following him in quick pursuit is this man in a dark green jacket who gives a signal to his colleague across the street who is following another businessman also on his way to deposit roughly 1 million shillings at the bank. This group of men pulling no stops as they also pull out guns as he rushes through the cars to intercept the second businessman who attempts to flee. Quick thinking saves him as he offloads the bag of money to one of his security guards who takes the bag back to the Forex Bureau. One of the administration police officers also manning the Forex Bureau also comes to his rescue after his shouts attracted a crowd of people milling around to see what the fuss is about. What many don't know is that the men who attempted the robbery will later be identified as police officers. In a bid to appear as the heroes in this situation, one of the men who moments earlier was chasing after one of the businessmen for his bag of money frog marches him, claiming he has caught the culprit of the attempted robbery. They attempt to shove him and the other businessman into this car, a Toyota Premio, registration number KBZ 036Z, but once again support from the public saw him released and the group of men take off. The businessman later reported the incident at a police station, including details of the make of the vehicle that tried abducting them. This saw the group of men later intercepted at Muthaiga area. A Jericho pistol with 15 rounds of ammunition, as well as a Gilboa pistol with 14 rounds of ammunition, were also recovered from 2 of the officers.
Over 3 million shillings.
The 4 men were today presented in court. They have been identified as Stanley Mohamed Gitonga, Eliud Bor, Sergeant Daniel Wambua, and Sergeant Nicholas Murira.
Officer before you, who has taken oath, has not disputed that the suspects before you are police officers. The continued detention of the suspect, apart from they need to record statements.
The businessmen suspect that the officers had been watching their movements as they are still puzzled as to how they knew they would be making their way to the bank at that exact time. Were it not for the quick intervention of their security guards and the public, they are afraid of how the situation would have played out. The motor vehicle which was used in the incident has been detained at Regional Police Headquarters, Nairobi area. Ngina Kirori, NTV.
Residents of Kiambu have protested against the ongoing leadership wrangles in the county. The residents are calling on the governor and members of the county assembly to bring the row to an end and focus on serving the people. The 2 parties had differed on the modalities of distributing the county's bursaries. And with that report is NTV's Martin Mwangi.
As such, the court hereby agrees that the complaint hereof be marked withdrawn under section 204 CPC, and that in terms of that section, each of the accused persons be now acquitted of the charges hereof.
Freedom at last.
Freedom at last.
And in those few words that must have sounded music to the ears of Communication Authority Chairperson Mary Wambui Mungai, and her daughter Purity Njoki Mungai, whose legal wars with the taxman now coming to a close after a year-long battle in defense in a 2.5 billion shillings tax evasion case. The two, who are directors of Parma Holdings Limited, were arrested in 2021 in one of the many raids by the state to recover unpaid taxes that had amounted to billions of shillings, that also raised eyebrows within political circles. KRA states that the duo was facing 8 counts of offences under the Tax Procedures Act 2015. They denied the charges and were granted bail of 50 million shillings.
We will have need a copy of this, maybe we can.
Following a communication from Times Tower, the DPP's office presented its prayer to drop the case, stating that there had been successful compounding of offences on December 6, 2022 and subsequent payment of fines imposed.
And Your Honor, in light of those circumstances, they requested our office to facilitate the withdrawal of the charges in accordance with Section 204 of the Criminal Procedure Code.
Lawyers of the accused Nelson Harvey and Dr. Hamoto expressed no objection to the offer of withdrawal of the charges their clients faced.
And having considered the record, the submissions by counsel for the state and counsel for the accused, I'm satisfied that the complainant, having considered and compounded the matters the subject of these charges, the substratum of the same now no longer exists, and that the complainant has advanced sufficient grounds to enable the court to permit a withdrawal of its complaint under Section 204 of the CPC.
With that, Mary Wamboi and her co-accused walked free several months after fellow businessman Humphrey Kariuki, who was also facing charges of tax evasion, was also acquitted. Kariuki was facing charges amounting to 17 billion shillings. His premises were also shut down as the police accused him of being in possession of unaccustomed goods. The case was quashed by the High Court Judge Anthony Mrima over the move by the DPP to allow KRA to prosecute the businessman. The taxman's new chairperson, Anthony Moura, has found infamy when his company's Hardy Enterprises and Toddy Civil Engineering Company were implicated in a City Hall scandal for allegedly receiving irregular payments amounting to 102 million shillings. Leila Mohammed, NTV.
I do beg your pardon. That report was actually about the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions dropping a 2.5 billion shilling tax evasion case against businessman Mary Wamboi in a letter to the DPP from KRA. The decision was reached after the accused paid fines imposed. The dismissal follows that of fellow businessperson Humphrey Kariuki, who was facing charges of evading tax amounting to 17 billion shillings. Now, for that report by Martin Mwangi, residents of Kiambu have protested the ongoing leadership wrangles in the county. The residents are calling on the governor and the members of the county assembly to bring the row to an end and focus on serving the people. The two parties had differed on the modalities of distributing bursaries.
Voices of irate Kiambu residents were up in arms, demonstrating against the impasse between Governor Paul Kimani Wamatangi and the members of County Assembly. The residents tried to gain entry into the county offices, but were locked out at the main gate. The main aim of the protest was to implore the two parties to bury the hatchet and deliver the mandate of serving the people.
Tungependa sana gavana wetu wakae chini na MCAs juu hata hao walichaguliwa na ni sisi tu tuliwachagua. Wakae chini waongee na MCAs wote wa Kiambu. Wasikilizane ndio mvurutano itoke, ndio Kiambu iende mbele.
Tunataka kutoka siku hii ya leo. Tarehe 10 mwezi wa Januari hiyo msasano iishe.
The MCAs had on Monday accused the governor of sidelining them from the plans of distributing the bursaries in their respective wards. The MCAs alleged that Wamatangi had appointed committees to handle and distribute the bursaries at the ward level without consulting them. Further, they had accused him of intending to use his foundation to disperse the county's bursaries. Later, the MCAs held a meeting with the governor and they agreed to resolve their differences.
There was only some small misunderstanding between the executive and the assembly, just like in any other form of organization. But we as the leadership of this beloved county of Kiambu, we have discussed our issues and we have agreed unanimously that we are going to move together as one and that there is no rift between either side, between the executive and the assembly.
Tukasikizana ya kwamba yale mambo labda yangekuwa yametafsiriwa vibaya na watu wakifikiria kwamba ati kuna malumbano ama tofauti kubwa kati yetu, ndio tukasema wacha tuketi tuhakikishe watu wa Kiambu ya kwamba hatuna mambo ya kutofautiana.
The governor has pledged to begin rolling out the 200 million shillings worth of bursaries by February. Martin Mwangi, NTV.
The Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, is on the spot over possible embezzlement of 2.28 billion shillings, irregular hiring of some members of staff, failure to account for donor funds, among other ills. The claims are contained in a letter that has been sent to the office of the Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, and investigative agencies by a senior staff member. Duncan Hemba reports that the letter to the DP surfaces a few weeks after another civil servant paid for an advertisement in the Daily Nation in an open letter to the president, raising concerns over a deal to rob allegedly the National Land Commission of a possible 11.16 billion shillings.
The Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, is ailing if the contents of a letter addressed to DP Rigathi Gachagua are anything to go by. The letter was written on 29th November 2022 and its reference was and remains financial irregularities, mismanagement, abuse of office and malpractices at KEMRI. In the letter, the Kenya Union of Civil Servants KEMRI branch says it has received from its members information regarding serious financial mismanagement and various malpractices that entail a non-status of accumulative 2.28 billion shillings. It is alleged KEMRI received 473 million shillings from the National Treasury for payment of risk and extraneous allowances, including arrears in the year 2019, with 60 million shillings being monthly capitation. Therefore, it is believed that for 38 months since then until November 2022, KEMRI had received a total amount of 2.28 billion shillings. The union says its request for the status and whereabouts of the funds through a letter addressed to KEMRI Director General on 28 October 2022 has never been responded to. Another matter is failure by KEMRI management to account for approximately 1.2 billion donor funds. It is claimed that a senior officer has misused the funds, a situation likely to affect research programs which heavily depend on donor funding, adding that the same official has not accounted for 12 million shillings impressed as per an internal audit report. Illegal hiring, promotion and appointment of some staff also being raised as a major concern, with the management being accused of failing to fill the position of Deputy Director, Human Resource, and instead requesting for secondment of a crony of one of the top managers from the Public Service Commission. An individual, in the union's opinion, was in bad faith because that individual does not possess the required membership from the Institute of Human Resource Management. Another case cited is whereby an individual was promoted to the position of Deputy Director, Head of Internal Audit, a position that was not vacant, an issue the union says it is abuse of office by some senior managers at KEMRI. With regard to Attorney General's circular on engagement of private legal services by state corporations, which directed that a state corporation shall not engage an internal legal service provider without prior express approval of the Attorney General, it is alleged that the Department of Legal Services at KEMRI has failed to comply with the circular. The same letter is said to have been sent to investigative agencies to have the matter acted upon, among them the EACC. In December 2022, an anonymous civil servant paid for an advertisement in the Daily Nation, writing an open letter to President William Ruto, what that person termed exposing how a single daring cartel entrenched at the National Land Commission is working to rob the Kenyan exchequer of 11.16 billion shillings. Duncan Haemba, NTV.
All right, those are the stories that are making headlines on NTV. Now we'll take a look at the headlines that are making, the stories that are making headlines on the dailies, including our very own Daily Nation. Just a reminder of the topic of conversation this morning. I intend to collect an extra trillion shillings in the next 24 months. We are interrogating Ruto's, what he terms as his one bullet debt strategy. With me in studio this morning, we have Professor Exen Iraki, the early bird, Dr. Francis Omondi, both of whom are economists. We have Irene Otieno, National Coordinator, National Taxpayers Association, and Eric Misiani, Regional Tax Manager, Africa at SMEC International. All right, let's take a look at the front pages of the dailies, and we have the Daily Nation. The top story here is Ruto's education reforms headache. The projected cost of interventions in the education sector for the next 5 years, the projected cost is 635 billion shillings. 2 billion shillings pay for in-service teacher training, 238.4 billion shillings bridge the current teacher shortage of 116,000 within 2 financial years, 28.84 billion improve capacity of day schools to guarantee access to quality education and reduce the costs, 275 billion shillings establish a national skill and funding council that amalgamates HELB and increase of funding to bridge the current 45% gap. 9.5 billion shillings double the school feeding allocation to cater for increased number of beneficiaries from 2 million to 4 million, and 79.43 billion shillings provide conditional grants to counties for school feeding to raise the numbers to 8 million in primary schools and ECDE centers. Experts have costed President William Ruto's administration's ambitious plan to streamline and improve the education sector at a whopping 635 billion shillings. This could prove a tall order for a government grappling with competing priorities. These competing priorities form the topic of conversation, just reminding you this morning, and put the head of state's mantra of walking the talk to the test. I can see here on the ticker, Chiloba, U.S. offers to help Kenya in Chiloba murder probe. A U.S. State Department spokesperson called for thorough and transparent investigations into the killing of the LGBTQ activist. And 800 shillings will get you DNA collection kit, not test result. So have I missed anything on the front page of the Daily Nation? Aha, up here. KCSE exam marking rocked by strike. Education CS Ezekiel Machogu led a team of officials to mediate a crisis at St. Francis Girls' School in Kiambu County, where examiners boycotted work, citing poor pay despite working for long hours. Some of the teachers walked away in protest. And Thika-based Lesedi real estate firm leaves investors in tears. I believe this report was done by, can I remember? It was on Saturday. It was done by Brian Obuya. You should be able to find it on NTV Kenya's YouTube channel. All right, front page of the Taifa. Let's start there. Sabuni ya Kenya Kwanza, mashtaka dhidi ya wale wanaoaminika kuwa wafuasi wa rais yaondolewa na mwendesha mashtaka kiholela. So cases withdrawn by the DPP. Taifa Leo views that his what is informing these decisions as quote-unquote kiholela. And here we have Mary Wamboi. We had that report earlier done by Leila Mohammed. Again, you can find it on the NTV Kenya YouTube channel. Here are the others against whom cases have been withdrawn who are a part or are allied to the Kenya Kwanza administration. All right, a Business Daily front page. Java back on sale as UK equity fund eyes billions. Actis looking for buyer for its 100% stake. Sources estimate asking price of 4.9 billion shillings. Down here, Safaricom makes U-turn on Bunga Point's expiry plan. And on their ticker, they have Kenya, Tanzania resolve 23 trade barriers after Samia visit. Kenya electricity capacity crosses the 3,000 megawatt mark. Diaspora remittances defy inflation to hit 453 billion shillings. All right, that is the Business Daily. Let's take a look at what is on the front page of the Standard and the Star. And on the Star front page, mystery death. What killed city alcohol tycoon Francis Kiambi? That is a question they are asking. The image they have on their front page is of President William Ruto in Kiganjo. 5,000 recruits to join police service. This was yesterday. And on the front page of the Standard, deal that saved Wamboi, quote unquote, Wamboi wa Ruto. DPP withdraws case against Mary Wamboi, a close ally of the president, who was recently appointed chairperson of Communications Authority of Kenya after she agreed with KRA on payment plan. So that's the big story on the Standard this morning. And I will transition us into the topic of conversation this morning, just to refresh your memory. For some of us, in the morning, things take time to load. So again, our topic of conversation is I intend to collect extra trillion in the next 24 months, interrogating Ruto's 1 billion debt strategy. And interrogating said strategy with me in studio this morning, Professor Exen Iraki, Dr. Francis Omondi, an economist. Professor Exen Iraki is also an economist. Irene Otieno, National Coordinator, National Taxpayers Association. Eric Misiani, Regional Tax Manager, Africa at SMEC International. I'll start with, who should I start with? I'll start with you, Dr. Omondi, given you're first up on the line. President William Ruto, when talking about the debt situation in which we find ourselves, during a media interview on the 4th of January, spoke about KRA collecting 2 trillion shillings a year. He said 1.4 trillion of that amount goes towards repaying debt. He said the 600 billion shillings covers part of the 700 billion shillings that is used to pay salaries. He said then now they have to borrow borrow money for the counties. Is the situation as he depicted it?
Thank you, Olive. Yes, that is the situation as it is right now. The current regime inherited an economy that was in a very poor state. We were relying so much on borrowing, especially foreign debts, but the president has decided to put a brake on foreign borrowing. But they've taken a two-pronged approach in order to address the debt situation in the country. One, they've put a brake on foreign borrowing, and two, they intend to increase domestic revenue mobilization. This is a good approach, and it's the only thing to do when you're in such a situation. It is the only thing to do in such a situation. However, the approach that has been taken may also encounter some challenges. One, by relying so much on tax revenue, they intend to widen or broaden the tax revenue base. The only challenge is who is going to bear the burden of the increased tax revenue that the government intends to raise.
Okay.
If the burden,
so I'll ask you to leave us there at a cliffhanger before, because we'll eventually get to that. But I just want to also get your sense, Professor Exen Iraki, is the situation as the president depicted it?
I think if you remember when we were campaigning to get a new president, one of the biggest issues was debt. That President Uhuru's government had incurred out of national debt. And President Ruto and his lieutenant said that once we get to power, we are going to see how we are going to reduce our national debt. And one of the ways to reduce the national debt is to raise money from taxes. And that's why the government is so focused on raising more tax revenues so that we borrow less. So in my opinion, I think Kenyans asked for it, because you don't want to pay, to pay for or to pay debt, So why don't you pay more taxes? So it's interesting to see how the voters are going to react when they are told, pay more taxes because you don't want us to borrow. But I think in the long run, the government must balance between borrowing and taxes, because if you tax people too much, they become economically unproductive. Remember, a tax cut is usually an incentive for people to work harder. So the government in the next few months must show us how it's going to balance those two. But there's no question about it that the government needs more revenue. The question is where to get that money from. You also remember when the president got power, he said he is going to come up with austerity measures. I'm going to chop spending by 300 billion. So I think there are different approaches that the government is using to make sure that we can cover the budget. And remember, traditionally, we have always had a budget deficit. It's a tall order for the government, but it's doing something. The question is how successful it is going to be.
All right, because you talked about austerity measures, cutting expenditure. And I recall yesterday I was reading, I believe it was the Financial Standard, and they talked about how the hospitality industry especially will be impacted by that decision. But before we get further into that, Eric, I'm also curious to get your take. Ken Mijungo used to work here, a colleague of mine, and during the interview he talked about Kenya being high risk as far as debt is concerned, and debt distress. Are we in debt distress?
First of all, Olive, thank you for having us. It could be true because we have borrowed a lot in the previous periods. If you compare with other countries like Zambia and even Ghana, basically what Ken was mentioning in that interview, we are not yet there, but we are approaching that direction. So the thing then is that how do we put brakes to borrowing? How do we ensure that we manage to pay off some of our debt by raising more revenue, so that then we pay off the debt, and then based on the revenue we have raised, we are able to implement the Kenya Kwanza agenda. Yeah.
All right. Irene, speaking of colleagues who I look up to and who I've worked with, Mark Masai is another one that worked here. He asked President Uhuru Kenyatta a question about Kenya's debt situation. And President Uhuru Kenyatta, former President Uhuru Kenyatta, responded to him that, do you know how much debt the developed world is in? And he asked him, do you know what the debt situation is in Japan? And Mark Masai responded, some viewed it cheekily, that I'm not in Japan, so what I am concerned about is Kenya. Are we making much ado about nothing?
Thanks, Olive. And as colleagues have already mentioned, I think it's an important, extremely important conversation. So the questions and the interest both from the media and the public is needed. Remember, coming from the civil society sector, we've under the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, we as civil society organizations have been also very concerned with the issues of debt, because we feel a significant part of the revenue that is coming in that ought then to go into service delivery is being channeled fast to repayment of debts, which it is a fast charge, as we said, on our resources. So it's for us as a civil society, and I think as citizens in Kenya, the main reason we are concerned about debt fast is it takes away from the possibility of providing essential public services. And so when the president speaks about collecting more taxes in the next 24 months, we feel that it is really not practical, because a collection of tax really is based on tax morale. So if citizens are not seeing provision of services, then how can we guarantee that in the next 24 months that tax will be able to be collected by the government? And I think this is a concern to both the individual and the corporate taxpayer. So I feel the debt situation is significantly contributing to the lack of connection between tax and service delivery. And for us, when you can be able to see tax providing essential services, then you have the morale to pay. So in the absence of that, and all of us can say that the state of our public services has deteriorated. So how then do you expect people who pay tax to continue paying it? So I think it would be an uphill task for government. And so debt then needs to be addressed. As Prof has said, that citizens ask the question, we don't want to continue paying debt, so that means then the fallback is on tax. I feel what we need to query is is it the debt that we are acquiring, is it needed? What is it for? So tracking what that debt was for, was there a consensus by most citizens that those projects are actually in the first place necessary for us to move forward as a country?
All right. Dr. Francis Omondi, did former President Uhuru Kenyatta have a case? Are we making much ado about nothing? That he talked about Japan in the interview I referenced with Mark Masai.
No, not really, Olive. We cannot compare the two countries. Japan is developed, Kenya is developing. And even if you look at the quality of provision of public services in Japan, at least they're seeing where the debt is used. But in Kenya, we were borrowing a lot, but in terms of the provision of public services, citizens are not quite happy. Yes.
All right. So you're saying we can't compare the two economies?
No, we cannot compare the two.
Prof, what's your take on that?
If you look at the statistics, which we normally use to find out how indebted a country is, you look at debt over GDP ratio. Kenya, the last time I checked, is about 70%. Japan is about 225. US is about 100%. So even developed countries have a higher GDP, have a higher debt to GDP ratio than Kenya. But as my colleagues put it, it's not a question of how much debt you have. It is what are you using that debt for. If you assure me that if I get debt today, my grandchildren will live a better life, I have no problem with you acquiring the debt. So the voters and the citizens are asking, you have acquired this debt, but what have you done with it? As my colleague put it, are we seeing improvement in the provision of services? So I think you are right in saying that Kenya is not Japan in one simple way, that we don't use or we trace our taxes the same way. Or not taxes, but debt. There's nothing wrong with acquiring debt. I can assure you everybody here has some debt. I'm sure you also have some debt.
No.
The question is, you must be the luckiest Kenyan.
Well, I have the government debt.
You see, so I think we can get debt, but let's put it into good use.
All right. Eric, how sure are we then? If there's a question of how this debt was put to use, how sure are we then if we collect more taxes, it will be used in the appropriate fashion?
In fact, that's the elephant in the room, that the government wants us to pay more tax or to continue paying extra tax, or they are trying to raise more revenue. But then the spending of that revenue that has been raised is what is in question, because previously we have seen government resources being misused by a few of us. So we have a number of examples we have seen in Kenya. Some of the individuals now are maybe politicians who squandered government resources, and that's to the point Irene was raising over tax morale of the Kenyans. I think that then what it happens, it does, it deepens the morale of Kenyans to pay tax or to resist paying of taxes. So if the government wants us to pay more tax and even acquire more debt, then let them spend the money in the right projects that were geared to be implemented. But this aspect of a few individuals squandering our resources and then there's nothing happens. You have seen previously a number of individuals who were accused of corruption. Now they have been set free. So that way then what it does, it reduces the morale of Kenyans to pay tax. But if we are seeing that there are a lot of projects that have been implemented, we are seeing that there are results, there are tangible results that we can see from our revenue, then Kenyans will be willing to contribute more and even pay willingly. Some of the countries like Canada, you realize that their system, they are willing to pay because they know if I pay my taxes, school fees will be taken care of, medical, other utilities like power, roads, and other utilities. But in Kenya, we are not assured that once you pay, the government will be able to channel those resources in the right use, and that's what basically reduces the morale of our Kenyans to pay.
Okay, and Irene, if I'm hearing yourself and Eric correctly, I'm hearing you say that we cannot have a conversation about mobilizing more taxes in isolation, that there needs to be a conversation in tandem about ensuring that these taxes are utilized as intended.
I think that is the paramount. And I think just yesterday I had a friend who was had received, I think, a call for an interview, and so she was looking at the salary that they were offering. So she did the pay as you earn calculator. She was going to pay out of her potential employer 114,000 in taxes, but she's still already struggling on how will she take her children to school come 23rd of January. So she still is paying would pay 114 Kenyan shillings in taxes, but still has to put 3 of her children in a private school, costing around 200,000 or so. Remember, garbage collection is still being, she has to source for that privately. When she goes to hospital on NHIF, she'll be told she's not a civil servant, or most of the facilities you'll find will say government has not paid them, so they are not willing to provide. So you have an NHIF card that is essentially not giving you health provision. So indeed, we cannot have a conversation around tax in isolation from service delivery. And it would also be interesting to see the person in charge of the Kenya Revenue Authority also pushing back a bit. I know our president is open to reason, so it would be good for the Kenya Revenue Authority to just say, yes, you're giving us targets, but these targets and this achievement would be greatly affected by the wastage that we are seeing, so that the Revenue Authority is also saying, yes, we are going to hit these targets, but what is the executive hand through the presidency doing on matters corruption? You've just shared with us, I think, the dailies this morning, where you're talking about the billions being potentially lost at KRA. So why would someone really even think we are going to get to that target? Because we can collect the money, but it will still be lost. So I think the conversation needs to be balanced, that as the government tells us about hitting those targets in 24 months, equally we should be hearing what action is being taken on the Auditor General's report, Control of Budgets report, and also looking at other areas of wastage. We have already mentioned our wage bill, which essentially supports only 17% of Kenyans who are in formal employment, but get a lot from what we are paying as revenue. So that again will affect the issues of redistribution and providing services. So I think as Kenya, we have to come to a consensus, particularly state and public officers, for them to understand that we must cut on some areas. How do we cut on allowances of state and public officers to something that is manageable? Look at how much as a country we are giving in the Inua Jamii programs. We are talking about 2,000 or so per month. And then an allowance for another person is around 14,000 per day for, they call it DSA or something like that, the per diems. So the inequalities in our tax system also really needs to be addressed if we want to improve our tax collection. So it's an issue of equity first, equity, issues of accountability, and transparency on our tax systems, I think need to be attached to this conversation of improving and having these targets for the next 24 months.
Okay, and which you actually preempt my next question. And this soft life, you know, is the president, in your view, Dr. Omondi, being genuine when he talks about cutting back expenditure, when what Irene has talked about is happening? These high-ranking government officials moving in fuel guzzlers, they're earning high allowances, you know, compared to the ordinary Mwananchi, who we refer to as Wanjiko. You know, fine, they may have been told that foreign trips are cancelled. Do you think there's more room to save in government, given that, as pointed out by President William Ruto, a good portion of the revenue generated is being pumped into government?
Thank you, Olive. So cutting down on expenditure would be welcome if it's targeting the unnecessary expenditure by top government officers. But if it is intended to target basic services that are offered to the poor, then it's not the right move.
All right.
Yes.
So, I mean, he has identified, the president identified priority areas such as education and health, saying this is where the monies should be directed, not in advertising and other other areas he viewed as superfluous. Professor Exen Iraki, is government being genuine on cutting back expenditure in your estimation?
That's a very interesting question to ask because if you look at where the tax revenues go to, a lot of that money goes to paying salaries and wages. So if you have to reduce the expenditure, we have to reduce the number of government employees or reduce the so-called allowances or their salaries. That has political implications. If you look at a country like Kenya that has such a high rate of unemployment, it would be politically suicidal to reduce the number of people working for the county government or the national government. So from an economic point of view, it makes sense to reduce the number of government employees. But from a political point of view, it is very hard. So the government, I think, is genuinely saying we want to reduce the costs or the expenditure or come up with an austerity measure. But in reality, it's very hard. If you remember about 2017 or thereabout, when we were going to the polls, I think it was 2013, President candidate Raila Odinga was almost winning the Rift Valley because he was saying that the government is targeting your people. Your people are being sacked from the government. And it becomes very emotionally charged and politically charged when you tell government officials to go home. So the government can reduce the expenses, but I want to see, it has to think in the long term. It cannot be done overnight. And one of them is the small things. Like I notice here there's no flowers. But if you go to a government office this morning, you'll find some flowers. So I think we can look at we can start by pruning the edges. And after that, we go to the core. But at the end of the day, we are not looking at the main issue, which I think, in my opinion, is how do we make sure that people have money to pay? We won't pay taxes, but we should be asking where is that money coming from? And that should be the debate we're having now. Because if you grow the economy so that more people have jobs, they pay income tax. If we expand our business, people have money to pay. So we are not talking about raising more taxes, but you're not asking where that money is coming from.
All right. And part of the recommendations that have been made is that government needs to pay off pending bills, Eric, to pump money into the economy. But then on the flip side, right? So say government has taken the decision to cut back on advertising. Then what does that mean for the Nation Media Group, for instance? The hospitality sector is just recovering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The extended school holiday is helping now, but if government officials stop holding seminars or benchmarking, what does that mean for the hospitality sector? If the as Professor Exen Iraki says, they stop buying flowers, then what happens to that guy who goes to City Market every morning, picks flowers and takes them to government offices? He's probably like, why are you denying me that small money when billions, President Uhuru Kenyatta told us 2 billion a day unaccounted for?
Yeah, sure. That was the big issue because first of all, starting with the bending pills. In fact, I know a couple of individuals who have not been paid since 2017 by county government. And because of that, then they are not able to meet their financial obligations, including a payment of taxes. I remember one of the individuals the other day called me because KRA were on his neck because they had not paid the taxes. And was asking that, or arguing that I supplied the county government, I've not been paid, then why do I get money to pay the taxes? So it has a ripple effect in the sense that if you don't pay, then the value chain is affected. So you find somebody who's owed by government is not able to pay his suppliers or the people yours, and then those people are not able then to meet their financial obligation. So its cuts are closed. If government wants to also to raise taxes, then counties, government, and the national governments need to pay federal suppliers supplying to the government agencies, so that then those suppliers have what financial wherewithal to to pay off some of their debt or to meet their financial obligations. To your second point on cutting on unnecessary, what will be deemed to be an unnecessary expenditure, including hospitality industry, like maybe flowers, like the way Professor Iraki has mentioned, it would be a good thing. Of course, it will affect some individuals who are in those businesses, but then from a government point of view, they are able to make a saving, and that saving then can be applied to provide service or to provide public good, which we all need. So in the morning when I was coming here, there were a lot of potholes where when I was driving, I hit one of the potholes, and even I was fearing that I may not even reach here on time. So those are some of the issues that we need to address as a country, so that if we spend, we save on some of the expenditures which are deemed to be unnecessary, then we are able to apply those funds in more deserving areas, which will then will spur the economy. In that way, then the economy will be able to sustain itself, and a number of individuals will be able to get something to take home. Those individuals who are maybe operating those hospitality industries, or even those who are operating the horticulture or flower industries, perhaps they can find a way of rerouting that products of theirs to other countries, like now Netherlands, where they need those flowers, or to diversify to other businesses, so that then they are able to have something to sustain their livelihoods. So cutting expenditure, unnecessary expenditure, is paramount to government to meet its agenda, because you may find even those people who are supplying governments, some of them in fact are paid, but they do not pay taxes. So one of the areas then to improve is to ensure that we adopt some of the technological solutions to enhance revenue mobilization in Kenya.
All right, so digitization, and that is partly what the president has put on the table as a way to, because there's a question, Professor Iraki, where are these taxes, this broadened tax base, which is it, right? The other day I read about this capital gains tax. It has increased from 5% to 15%. Yesterday on the Financial Standard, I read that that will generate about 20 billion shillings annually, up from an approximate 5 billion shillings. I was at a forum with Irene and Dr. Omondi here on wealth tax. Maybe they can tell us what this wealth tax is. Speaking of suppliers, Zainab Wandati, naomba unisaidie na notebook for Professor Exen Iraki. I forgot he had asked for a notebook. He has now been forced to write notes on his newspaper. Thank you very much. We take a break. We'll be back with more.
That was very kind.
My name is Norman Udipo, former NTV business anchor and also a reporter, currently a communications consultant with Apex Porta Novelli. I was among the few who were privileged to attend the Man Cave, which was sponsored and led by Nation Media Group. I think for me it was the first ever, the real first ever men's conference. And I know there's been all this talk around men not talking. But I think for me, that needs to change, because men talked. Maybe not everyone, but men talk. And I just want to encourage men to talk, because that's how you're going to cope with the stresses, with the challenges of life. The same way like the women do. So I think for me it was an eye-opener, it was a watershed moment, and looking forward to more conversations, more sharing of experiences in February 2023.
If what you want is a husband with a lot of money, then I'm telling you that you were mistaken.
No, I didn't make a mistake with you. I made a mistake with us.
Be careful of a person who is not whom she says she is. She's going to arrive in your life and cause a lot of harm.
Oh my goodness, the horoscope said that? I'm really very worried now. No, I'm really worried, Marbella.
Well, keep on laughing. Are you finished?
You better leave her alone right now, or I will smash your face in. You watch your mouth. I'm your older brother. Oh, really? Are you my brother?
Hey, stop it, you two. Stop it.
Heck is wrong with you, huh?
Break
well, you're just like your father, huh?
Enough.
It had to be you.
Recharge and get upgraded to make memories with your loved ones this new year. Anytime, anywhere. Star Times. Enjoy the
Now this is what we call convergence. Come through for the morning fix this and every single Friday right here on MTV. Yes, it's about that time.
You know, the coolest thing about mornings is that a girl and two guys together in the mix, you never know what to expect. You guys are crazy.
From Friday 6, bring your good vibes, bring your picks. From 7 a.m., it's a dope mix. Every single thing on Friday changes with a morning fix.
I don't agree with your cost-cutting policies. I mean, it's no wonder why all these years your sales have not been improving. Because you don't take risks, hence there are no rewards.
Taking risks isn't an option. If we ever suffered a loss, the company would have to close down.
Boom! Royal flush! Woo! 20 million! I'll take that right now. Sorry, boys.
I'll order anything you want.
We can order room service.
Well... Sure, all right, fine. I'll be right there. You can order me whatever.
Forever, my love. This Christmas, gift yourself, friends and family with phones, more phones, and even more phones. Get up to 36% off on selected items. Offers are available at Safaricom shops, dealers and masoko.com.
Welcome back to AM Live. We are discussing what we did over Christmas. I was saying I was here, right here, working. All right, so let's continue this conversation on taxation and debt. And I mentioned a forum at which myself, Irene, and Dr. Omondi participated, in which we participated. And it was on the question of wealth tax. So when Professor XN Iraki asks, Prof, the notebooks are here.
Very good.
Elsie, just go ahead and pass them along. When Professor XN Iraki asks, where is this additional tax going to come from? If we are looking at it from the lens of wealth tax, Dr. Omondi, what are the possible avenues?
Thank you. So Kenya is not taxing high net worth individuals. So we do not have explicit wealth tax in Kenya. A number of countries across the globe are already taxing high net worth individuals. In Africa, we have South Africa, we have Mauritius, and our neighbor Uganda. So we estimated that if we introduce wealth tax and we tax high net worth individuals, Kenya can raise up to 175 billion additional revenue every year.
So when you say high net worth individuals, what do you mean?
So the estimation that we did, we considered Kenyans who have a net worth of 500 billion Kenya shillings and above. So we had three categories. Those who have a net worth of 500 billion Kenya shillings and above. Then the next category is those who have 750 billion net worth and above. And then the next one is those who have a net worth of 1 trillion and above. So if we tax those who have a net worth of 500 billion and above at a rate of 3% per annum, and we tax those who have a net worth of 750 billion and above at a rate of 5% per annum, and those who have a net worth of 1 trillion and above at a rate of 7% per annum, then would be able to raise a total of 175 billion additional revenue.
All right. So this 175 billion is premised on, like, how really realistically, how many individuals do we have worth those amounts, maybe apart from the Kenyattas and the Mois?
So for 500 billion and above, we had about 1,200 Kenyans. And for 750 billion and above, we had about 500. And 1 trillion and above, we had about 150 Kenyans.
150 Kenyans?
Yes, yes.
Are worth
1 trillion and above.
1 trillion Kenya shillings and above.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Why am I astounded by that figure? Irene, is that, in your view, a possible avenue?
Yes, and I'm happy that we worked on this with Dr. Omondi, and it was just in agreement with the fact that government has asked for different policy options. So it's not enough for us as institutions and and citizens to keep pushing back and saying we are being overtaxed. So we feel, and that is the informed position that we hold, that not all Kenyans are paying their fair share of tax. So there's this conversation that anytime government tries to bring in a new tax raising measure, people go like Kenyans are being overtaxed. So we did this study to contribute to that conversation. Are all Kenyans really overtaxed? And so looking at other jurisdictions, we looked at Japan, which has been mentioned here. We looked at several jurisdictions and we found, yes, they are taxing wealth. And our entry point for this piece of research was one, the inequalities that we see. Because if we are saying government already has a tax expenditure report, from President's speech, they were saying we will need to collect more from VAT. We still hold the view that VAT is a consumer kind of tax, and so the lower and the most vulnerable people will still be taxed when they're buying essentials. I know there are a few exceptions here and there. So the research then was like, who are not being fairly taxed? And you still mentioned the issue of capital gains tax. That is one example of a wealth tax that we were looking at. And so when you mentioned that we have now increased capital gains tax from 5 to 15%, and there is a lot of pushback from private players, particularly law firms and audit firms. And you can imagine the clients that law firms and audit firms advocate on whose behalf. So on whose behalf are people advocating for the smaller taxpayer? And that's where we come in to say, hey, no, there are other jurisdictions that are actually paying capital gains tax up to 50%.
Actually, so in the region, Kenya is
among the lowest.
It's the lowest. Uganda, I read, was 30%.
Exactly. So I think these are the examples we wanted to give to policymakers, particularly now that we have a new finance committee. So when they are looking at the finance bills and even reviewing other tax laws, are we giving them the benefit of what is happening in other jurisdictions? So we still hold the view that there is a lot of capture on issues of taxation. And a lot of the capture is by the big multinationals, is by audit firms and lawyers advocating for their clients. But there is no research, limited research really, on what other jurisdictions have applied and what are the few concerns, like on capital gains tax. I understand the auditors and the audit firms are not complaining really, are raising the concern that we have not adjusted for inflation. So rather than refusing that legislation, should be how are the countries that have put it at 50% adjusting for inflation, so that we only tax the actual gain when you're disposing the property. Remember, Olive, the way people hold property has fundamentally shifted because of technology and other issues. So if we get stuck in having tax laws that are very old school and are not aligning to the different ways of how economy and the wealth creation is evolving, then we miss out and we remain with the VATs, the pay as you earn. Well, the pay as you earn is something that, people have really, that area we can say they have been overtaxed. And that's why we are saying that the issue around the taxation cannot have one answer where we say we are overtaxed. No, there are different types of taxpayers, so we need different approaches to each. So it is fundamentally important that all of us are able to contribute to research that addresses different segments of taxpayers, and then saying for this area, we feel it has been overtaxed. And so the general, coming in from what Dr. Omondi has mentioned, our observation has been that in terms of raising taxes, particularly the elected members, there's a lot of capture there. We give example of tobacco taxation, which has a huge potential to be taxed. We have signed into a document as Kenya that says we need to tax tobacco products up to 70% of the retail price because we know its negative effect on healthcare. However, due to the huge lobbying power of the tobacco industry, this product is taxed at a low rate. But you will find us continuing to tax pay as you earn. We continue to tax some other areas. So capital gains tax, some of the sin tax are areas that we need to critically look at. When we also sit here and as an institution, sometimes advocate also for how do we tax more, maybe on sugar products, because then of the negative impact on health and diets. So So that's an interesting piece of research that we did with Dr. Omondi. We were shocked, as you are, that Kenya has very high net worth individuals. So our problems of saying these people living low, those are problems that people speak for themselves. So yeah, so we encourage people to look at that research. We look at sharing this more with the Revenue Authority and Treasury to see how this informs the taxing landscape in the next few years.
All right, Professor, I'll come to you to respond to the proposals that Irene and Dr. Omondi are making. But Dr. Omondi, there's something you want to add?
Yes, thank you. And sorry, I would just like to make some correction on the statistics on the number of Kenyans who are worth the high net worth individuals. So the statistics that I gave was for Africa, but for Kenya, we have about 1,300 Kenyans whose net worth is 500 million and above. Then we have about 500 Kenyans whose net worth is 750 million and above. And then we have about 130 Kenyans whose net worth is 5 billion and above. And when we talk about net worth, we look at the gross wealth minus liabilities.
So trillionaires?
We don't have trillionaires.
Oh, we don't have trillionaires?
Yes, yes,
so
yes.
Where did you source this information? Because on a light note, I'm single. Where did you source this information?
So the source of this data is WealthX data set. Yes, yes.
What does that mean? What is WealthX data set?
It's an international consultancy firm that collects data on wealth.
Okay.
Yes, across the globe.
Oh, all right.
Yes,
okay.
Yes,
we
yes.
have learned something
Yes,
new.
yes.
The WealthX.
Yes, yes.
Professor Exxon Iraki.
You notice since you started giving those statistics, my demeanor changed because I'm not a very happy man. Because I wanted to be among this 130, just like you. In fact, I wonder where my income is. You know, you didn't even bother to rank it, which I think is unfair. Just tell us, what about the others? How many they are? But I think we're having a very interesting question. One of them that was raised by Irene is that they did some research on tax. And believe it or not, despite all of us paying taxes, universities don't do a lot of research on tax. You already find PhD students or master students doing research on tax, which is a very important area. So they have talked about where the tax. But I thought taxation is always progressive. The more money you earn, the more tax you pay. So they did not specify that this is where the guys are going to pay a higher rate over and above what they are paying now. And I'm sure they will protest because they will say we have already paid our progressive tax. So maybe that should need to be very specific. I would have wanted them to mention in their research whether there was something like inheritance tax. In most countries, when you inherit wealth, you are taxed. And maybe that is going to stop a lot of language we find in this country when somebody wealth dies and people are fighting over his tax. That might not appear very, very, very human, but I think that money should be also be shared by the Kenyan public because they made that money from the public. So some of that money should go to tax. But I think on a more substantive issue, the question you should be asking, and I asked again, is how do we make Kenyans get income so that they pay taxes? So we want more enterprises in this country. We need to make this country for example, more welcoming to entrepreneurs. Look at Safaricom, for example. It's one of the biggest taxpayers in this country. So if we had more Safaricoms, we'd have more people paying income tax and also corporate tax. So the starting point for President Ruto and others should be to make this country very conducive to both local and international investors. Because once we expand the economy, it is obvious we are going to pay more taxes. Now we are focusing on the few existing enterprises. And that's why people have the perception that they are being overtaxed. You also notice that most people who pay taxes are people like you and me who are formerly employed. Because your money, we know how much it is. It is taxed before it comes to your pocket. But what about the people who work in the informal sector? Your carries, SMEs, and so on. They should also be taxed. And finally, one of the best ways to raise more taxes, which people find counterintuitive, is actually to use the tax rate. Now, I don't know whether you have gone to the not supermarket, but market in the evening. Kuna bei ya jioni. You reduce the price so that people buy more. So if we could reduce the tax rate, you probably would get more tax. So that reduce the VAT from 16%, 10%. So people will make more taxes. So we don't need to use very complicated methods to get more taxes. We can. But the most important one is simply expand the economy. People who get money, they will pay taxes.
All right. And it's actually something he talked about, making the business environment more conducive. He did say that's because he might have said one bullet, but listening to him, you got the understanding that he was talking of a multi-pronged
I would also
approach.
add one more thing. KRA is seen as a very aggressive institution. They want you to pay taxes. I want KRA to come up with a consulting wing. So that when I get a business, KRA should come and help me manage that business, expand it. Because if they help me expand that business, they get more tax.
More taxes.
Now, KRA is seen as a very aggressive. They just, in fact, if you see anybody here who looks very annoyed, you ask him, do you work for KRA? So KRA should become more aggressive. Not aggressive, but more friendly to taxpayers.
It's something he did raise. He talked about making the process friendlier.
Yes.
Eric,
yes.
This conversation about wealth tax, are you also one of those in the 500 million net worth brackets?
I wish I was. Yes. I wish I was. But hopefully, I'm hopeful that one day we'll get there. Yeah. So, in my view, because this wealth, is in different forms. Either could be assets, immobile assets, or mobile assets, and maybe other securities that the wealth do own, maybe in the stock exchange, or maybe other investments. So the question then is, how do you tax maybe land? Unless that person disposes of that land, then, or unless that person is doing some activities on that land, then there's no revenue. So for me, the way I see it is that the government or KRA needs to leverage on various IT or technology platform. Like now, last year, the former Minister for, the CS for RANS, Madam Farida Karone, introduced the RANS Information Management System. If we were to refresh on that system, which is dubbed RSS, then KRA will be a feasibility of the transactions that are happening that then will impact on stamp duty and even capital gains tax. But currently, KRA may not have feasibility of what is happening because you don't know sometimes that people have transacted. Perhaps for stamp duty, KRA is able to raise, to correct more accurate revenue because the person who does the valuation is a government assessor, and then they come up with a value. But for capital gains tax, you may not be able to know what is the gain because the way capital gains tax works is that you take selling price less adjusted cost. And adjusted cost will be the initial cost plus or other incidental costs that one has incurred to maintain that property up to the point of disposal. So I see even this increase of rate from 5% to 15%, there's a likelihood that the people around to dispose of that land may play around with the figures so that then they reduce the gain. So we need to ensure that we refresh on technology and then we nap more people into the system so that then they can pay off or rather pay taxes and we collect more.
All right. Irene, in your view, how much of a difference would digitization make?
Digitization, Olive, would make a huge difference. For one, we've what Eric has just mentioned, how do you track some of these transactions? So that was mentioned by the president. We had him talking about digitization. What my worry was he talking about digitization only for payment at the point of payment collection, or are we looking at digitization from the start so that we are looking at having the entire spectrum and not just coming in saying at the point of paying we want to use tech so that there is no issue of under collection. So we were in Vihiga some time back. Vihiga has made good use of GIS. As a county, they are able to see all properties that are within the county. So it's easy for the county then to be able to look at land rates and issues like that. So if we are looking at technology in such a way where Nairobi County, say, can be able to map all the businesses and be able to estimate and know these are the single business permits that we can be able to collect. So if the revenue officers come with less, then you're able to look at it. So in that way, I look at digitization making a big difference, in the sense that avoiding tax would not be as easy as it has been. Of course, digitization also is something we need to embrace because of the digital service tax that we've had, and we know a lot of people now are also doing business online. So is our tax administrator keeping pace with that? And if you look at their strategic plan, they've also mentioned this, and I think they've also been asking for higher budgets to be able to digitize, because that is also super expensive. So I think when government says we need to collect this by in the next 24 months, then it also means they must be able to invest in the capacity of the revenue authority in terms of tech, in terms of how do they get, because the transactions have become more difficult. Transactions are multi-country, and you're not looking at transactions just within one country. There are subsidiaries and issues around that. So then the capacity of revenues authority is critical, and that is an area, Olive, if we invest in, I think we will stop following too much the small taxpayers, but we'll also be able to see the potential revenue that as Africa and Kenya we are losing in illicit financial flows and issues like that. So yes, tech is important. Allow me to just mention something related to that, but when we are now looking at county own source revenue. So if you look at the CRA, Commission on Revenue Authorities reports, I think this has also been brought out. How many counties are automating their revenue streams? Because then it has been picked out that some revenue streams are not bringing in sufficient resources because we are not automating. And if you look, the land rate ones is what most counties are not automating. And I think one governor mentioned it and saying there is a lot of, as you're saying, it's politically suicidal. So it's a hard decision for politicians to make. The process is hijacked by politicians. And so if we are able to automate, I think we'll be able to bring a significant amount of resources in. So I would suggest that as a country, we look at tax as an intergovernmental relations issue. You find we look at this tax as a national, you are listening to the President Ruto talking about increasing tax. It would have been prudent to have the President accompanied by Council of Governor chairperson, because these are two entities that look different, but they're all working in one county. So if counties overtax at the lower level, then as Prof was saying, how do we encourage businesses in making the country and create jobs? So if counties are overtaxing, then people will close businesses, and that will impact on the national revenue. And so again, if national revenue doesn't tax sufficiently, particularly on the multinationals and the bigger boys, and we lose a lot in illicit flows, then the national government loses money that would come to counties as equitable share. So if counties do not have enough to improve service delivery at local levels, no one will invest at the county level. So then the conversation is, has Council of Governors looked at taxation as an intergovernmental issue? Is it something that they look at, so that we are not just clapping when we are saying counties are increasing on-source revenue? We should be able to look what has been the impact of on-source revenue on economy at the local level, and then how does this impact national level that will eventually come to county. So it would have been prudent to have both critical players, the President and the Council of Governors, looking at this as a wholesome. And I'm hoping that moving forward, that is something that the COG will take up more. We've been trying to have this conversation. How can they assert themselves more on national type of transactions? Because they would then impact what comes to equitable share, and would also impact economies that the governors are looking at. So yes, and as you're saying, then the automation should also be done at county level, where we are seeing there's a bit of progress to digitize at national, but there isn't so much progress to digitize at county. So we must also improve of capacities of county to digitize and collect sufficient revenue.
Okay. Dr. Mondi, there are two words that Irene used in this submission and the submission just before that, because she talked about capture, and some people are getting tingles because there was a lot of talk of state capture, and then she in this submission she talked about hijacking of government. How big a problem are illicit financial flows in Kenya?
So illicit financial flows is a big problem in Kenya. So we have not done much to deter illicit financial flows, because this is done by the wealthy who are able to cover their tracks. So the government needs to direct more resources towards curbing the issue of illicit financial flows. So one way of doing that is using the government agencies that are already existing in order to curb the illicit financial flows menace. It's not just a menace in Kenya, but also in Africa and across the globe. So we have tax havens where, I don't know whether to call them the rich or these people are engaged in illicit financial flows, steal money from Kenya and hide the other side. So again, it's an organized crime, which fighting may not be easy because they are able to fight back, but we really need to do something about it, because statistics that is available shows that it is indeed a big problem in Kenya, and we are losing a lot of revenue through illicit financial flows as well.
Given you're the numbers guy, can you give us an estimation of how much we're losing?
No, I do not have an actual figure right now.
All right, okay.
Yes, yes.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Okay.
I won't put you on the spot with that one.
Yes.
Professor Iraqi, did you get tingles when Irene was speaking about capture and hijacking of government?
I have been hearing that from politicians, right from the time they are campaigning up to the time they got into government, about the state capture. And in some countries, it is worse, where you have shadowy figures controlling the economy. They are not elected, they are not MPs, they are not senators, but they control the economy. And I think that's an area we must focus on with all the energy we can, because the moment the economy is captured by people who are not directly elected by the voters, then they do what they want. That means a lot of money is lost, because it never goes to legitimate state coffers. I would probably estimate the Kenya's underground economy as something like 20%, an economy that we don't know much about. So nobody can deny it exists in this country. And I think the government promised they will come up with an inquiry on that state capture. And I'm very eager to see what they are going to find out. It will be a very enticing debate, public debate. On digitization, I think I support all my panelists. This is the way to go. Because one, that's where the money is in future and not currently. A lot of things are going digital. So it will be easier to get that money. And number two, is more efficient. It's more efficient to tax, whether it is land, whether it is business, when it is digital than when it is physical. So I think that's the way to go. And then there's one thing we forgot about paying bills. I think we not put a lot of emphasis on that.
On the pending bills?
Yes, so that's a very important area. If you look at the gross domestic product of a country, it is simply the money in circulation multiplied by the velocity or the circulation of that money. So when you don't pay bills, you remove the circulation. The economy shrinks. So I think it's high time the government paid all the bills. Same with individuals, because that's a very big block on the growth of the economy that we don't put a lot of emphasis on. The government promised, I remember President Uhuru promised that public debts should be paid, and I think President Ruto has also come up with the same, but it has not been done as expected. A lot of people are complaining that I sold some goods to government, I provided some services to government, I have not been paid.
I recall there was a major push by Ukuriatani when he was finance cabinet secretary.
And whether you want or not, the government is a big player in business. So it needs to do its part.
All right. And allow me to refer to my Kenya. Eric, I just want to make sure, because I know you're part of ISPAC, right?
Yes, yes.
Give me a second. Let me just check my Kenya real quick right here. Found it. And I remember you telling me that you may also include that I am a member of ISPAC. Are you among those who are helping these individuals evade tax?
Not at all. We just play within the law. Basically, we base our actions on the law, so the tax laws, and nothing outside the law. So we don't evade tax. There could be a bit of tax planning here and there, which is within the law. So we don't assist anybody to evade paying their right share of tax.
All right.
Yeah. So as this pack, that's what we advocate. that as the members, we ensure that we peg our actions within the law. Yes.
All right, but I mean, you're not averse to taking advantage of we call them avenues that are there, because I mean, let's be honest and let's be real. If we could pay less tax, we would pay less tax.
Yes, and you see, that's what I'm saying, is within the law. Yeah, if the law provides for that loophole and you take advantage of it, you are not doing anything wrong. If the government didn't want taxpayers to take advantage of that, then they should have amended the law or removed or repealed that kind of section of the law.
All right. Yes. The Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, the other day on an interview on Inoro, and I base this information I'm about to share based off the Daily Nation article that was published about it yesterday, and he talked about cartels, you know, especially in the agriculture sector, and he talked about, is it the tea sector, where bonuses were paid using a loan, and now the government is on the hook for it, and he said the government is not paying, and there's all this talk of cartels. I mean, Irene, is there credence to the argument that our economy is captured?
Yes, in my opinion, it's clearly there. When you look at the legislation that are coming out of our National Assembly, you can see some of them going towards that direction, and particularly when I'm talking about tax laws. So areas where we think would push the agenda of citizens take a back seat, but agendas around private enterprises go forward. Particularly the area also, Olive, that we think we need to look at as citizens and as a country is the public-private partnerships. So the PPPs have been discussed as a way where we can have development as a country even if we don't have the immediate resources. But I think it's also important that our parliamentarians and the government looks at those contracts very well. So are we ceding too much as a country? So I think that's also an areas of PPPs where we are seeing that there might be some bit of capture, which might not be very intentional, but would be because of the maybe a lot of detail is not being looked at the point of contracting. So then you find and say for this particular road, we will be paying this much as a country, but you're wondering how much visibility does the country have to be able to see how much transactions is this enterprise, you know, getting in even as citizens are paying. So the PPP is an area that I think capture has significantly taken over. When you also look at, I keep saying, and I know in as much as we have said government is a key player in the economy, government needs to pump in money for either businesses, but look at major hotels where government holds conferences. Who owns a lot of these hotels? It's not me and you. Very difficult to find the hotels that we use to be used by government. As civil society players, we find a lot of these conferences, and you can already see this is a bigger enterprise. And I know the economists in the house will tell me that they are creating employment for others, but we also need to query what type of employment. Look at the amounts we are paying. So I feel in terms of capture, it's something that is there. We have been pushing for the longest time to have NHIF digitized. You remember there was no time you could put your finger, but now at least government has started doing that, which means private enterprises would be able to claim NHIF funds for a service they didn't offer. And I think that is something that DPP had pointed out that they're going to take strict action. But I think it's common sense. Why would, if smaller businesses have digitized, if I go to Nairobi Hospital, there's no way I'll get services without running my biometrics. But for government, you find NHIF was not doing that. Why would they not do the obvious? Unless they are keen on saying there are some private entities that should. So when you look at such things, we have consistently spoken about those allowances that the economists are saying we are looking at the smaller issues, yeah? When we are saying, when people are going for trips, why not give a card where you can be able to say, I've actually gone? Because when you tell me to go for a trip for 5 days, I will make the trips longer because you will give me the money. But if I have to run a card, there is no motivation for me to be out of my workstation for 5 days when the money will go to a hotel and not to me. So that is also an area we're asking on these allowances. And if we are serious that we want to benchmark, we want, yes, to give businesses So when you have the card, you will still have that approach that you're still benchmarking, you're still giving businesses, but you're killing the issue of people making trips for the sake of making trips. So that's an area we're asking, why does government not give someone a float, but either the way we as other players do, it's either paid directly or there's a card. So you see there's already, because it's not me and you that will go for these foreign trips to the States, there are specific people that will go. So when we are talking about capture, it's something very real and something that we need to be bold. At the onset, it will be very difficult, as you're saying, might look politically suicidal, but I think if you call yourself a leader in a country, you do not look at the immediate benefits or the immediate discomfort, but the long-term effect. I think history will judge you fairly when we can be able to say, within the tenure of this particular state or public officer, there was this decision that if we look within the next 5 years, it has saved taxpayers this much. And when you evidence such, then tax morale can go up. So in terms of tax capture, that I think is something that we have to deal with. And allow me to just go back a bit to what Eric had mentioned about tax avoidance. I agree with him totally. In the current state, I would also look at how I can pay minimal tax, because I pay tax and still provide all of the services that I need to provide for my family. So putting those options on the table, I will of course choose the option to avoid not evade. So I think then that's what we were saying. Can we build our the capacity of our tax authorities to either improve legislation? And I like how the minimum tax conversation has gone. We've seen it moving to court. I think the Revenue Authority has decided to move it now to Supreme Court, because from our end as civil society organizations, we have seen a bit of rationale where the Revenue Authority is going, where some businesses have been there for long, but saying they're not breaking even, so then they do not pay tax. So then the Revenue Authority said, let's try to get a minimum. But there was pushback from the industry, and they also had valid points. So I think what Eric was mentioning, that you can make good use of the law, and where there is contention, we move to court. As we move to court, I think we are strengthening our systems. Revenue Authority will now see, yes, in as much as we need to pass legislation on a tax law, we must look at issues of equity. A business that has just started vis-a-vis a business that has been there for longer. So issues of public participation, was it there? So I think I like the way the industry has moved to court on a tax-raising measure, which then is going to increase, to improve the quality of tax laws, so that we will not have a law where people are feeling this is favoring this person and not favoring that person. So I think it's interesting conversations that are coming from Kenyan's tax system, looking at how we are ventilating it in court, in social media. And so it's interesting just to see how these conversations are panning out.
All right, we need to take a break, but when we come back, Dr. Omondi, something the president has consistently talked about is a savings culture, so that we finance this debt locally or source this debt locally as opposed to foreign entities. We get into that on the other side of this break.
Few footballers get the chance for the storybook ending to their careers, and Cristiano Ronaldo is no different. Playing out his time in the Middle East after so many years of adulation in Europe is surely not how Ronaldo envisaged his career twilight. Yet, that adulation has easily transferred to the fans of Al Nassr. Delighted Ronaldo has moved to Saudi Arabia for his final years in football.
Recharge and get upgraded to make memories with your loved ones this new year. Anytime, anywhere. Star Times. Enjoy digital life.
Summertime is here. You know it's a holiday. School is closed. But feel the vibes.
And flow.
Now lean back. Lean back. Lean back. Lean back. Come on.
to the easy, M to the
Some love them, some love them. Come on, I'm jump on them and I'm rob them. Some love them.
For the best of the 2000s, tune in every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and Sunday from 8 p.m. to 12 midnight. Rhythm and flow.
Taking you back in the day.
Nation FM.
Welcome back to AM Live. And actually, I should have opened your comments on the touch screen, but it's just one of those days when I can't be bothered to stand up. But let me just read through some of your comments. And let me see. Johnny says, the only way to win Kenyans over is to seal the loopholes created by corrupt individuals, apprehend them, and stop releasing those already on the hook. It will work like magic. Mukiri Matigari says, would the tax experts tell us how many Kenyans are millionaires? This is asset and wealth above 1 million shillings. I think we've already addressed, we talked about 500 million shillings and above. And then interesting comment here. Ondeng says the president is obsessed with money. It doesn't matter how he will get it. He can even tax donations. But I did see something in the Finance Act of 2022. To be honest, a lot of it went over my head. I mean, I was busy Googling what are financial derivatives and, you know, reading the fine print on the capital gains tax and learning that it's about property, the tax is on the profit, and it's for transaction, where the profit, is it for transactions above 3 million shillings? I'll need to check the Finance Act again, and learning also that it covers shares outside of the National Securities Exchange. So I was doing a lot of learning yesterday, and I think I saw something on donations, Eric, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the Finance Act 2022, what it did is basically it expanded allowability of donations, those entities that are contributing as the donations to charitable organizations. So previously, it could only be allowable if you contribute as a donation, like now maybe Safaricom contributing to a charitable organization. Previously, Safaricom could not get a tax reduction. Yeah, because then unless that receiving entity or charitable organization had a tax exemption and was registered under the NGO Coordination Act, and also I think Public Benefit Organization Act. But now it has expanded the charitable organization that qualify, rather that can receive donation from various corporate entities, and then that donation can be allowed for tax purposes, so that is not added back as a disallowable expense. So that's what Finance Act 2022 did, to allow more players in the public benefit organization sector who are receiving these donations from corporate entities, and then the corporate entity will get a tax deduction.
All right. Understood. I knew I came across something of the sort. But Professor Exen Iraki, you were reading out some figures to us on this shadow economy.
Yeah, I saw something on KRA, and they were saying that globally about a third of the economy is shadow economy, under the table. So you don't tax it, you don't get any benefits as a tax person. In Africa, it's about 37.6%, but there was no specific data for Kenya. Okay. So that's a very big part of the world economy. So when we think about raising more tax revenues, let's also how we can bring more players from the shadows so that they pay their fair share of the tax, and we use it to develop this country.
All right. And I'll come back to you, Dr. Mondi. Okay. Yes, how mambo ya savings. It's okay. But perhaps also you could explain some, because I talked about needing to Google some things, right? And for some, this may just be basic knowledge. In fact, it's interesting to note that, is it the National Treasury was holding public hearings on the 2023-2024 budget between the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. So it's ending, actually starting today. I believe I saw something like that in the papers yesterday. But the president talked about, so he talked about inflation, and he said in October, I think it was at a high of 9.6%, yes. And then went down to about 9.1 in December. And then he talked about a fiscal deficit of 4.4%. Now, I know this is economics 101. But for those who are not able to attend an economics class, perhaps you could explain to us what these, especially that inflation we understand. Okay, perhaps just explain both.
Inflation is understandable to everybody because we are victims. You have this amount of money, but if there's inflation, you buy less. You have been buying 10 cabbages, you find yourself buying 8 cabbages. So when the price of goods and services go up, our purchasing power goes down. So we can buy less, we buy less for the same amount of money.
Okay.
So if you have some savings in the bank, you find it can do less for you. So I think...
So are you saying the value of the shilling?
The value
does it translate to the value of the shilling going down or what?
The value of the shilling also affects inflation. Because if the value of the shilling goes down, then you can buy less with the same money.
Okay.
And I think all of us are concerned about inflation. Because you find yourself paying for more for the goods and services, but your income does not go up.
So simply put, inflation is paying more for
less.
For less. All right, understood. And this fiscal deficit, you talked about this 4.4%. What is that about?
Fiscal deficit is simple. You have some government projects that you want to pay for, but you can't get enough money to pay for that. So ideally, if you have planned that the government budget should be 100 billion, you should get 100 billion. So if you get, for example, 90 billion, then you have a deficit of 10 billion. And that is what we are trying to cross by collecting more revenues, more tax revenues, so that we don't have any deficit.
So in this instance, you're saying the deficit is the gap between the revenue we have and the budget?
Yes, the revenue we have and the expenditure. We have the revenue here, we have our expenditure here.
Oh, okay, okay.
So if the expenditure is higher than the revenue, then we have to borrow to bridge that gap.
To plug that. Okay,
yes.
All right. Understood. Thank you very much. All right, something else that he spoke about, and it's something he has spoken about repeatedly. Savings culture, and he told us Chinese save, Kenyans don't save, and he said it's part of the reason a certain portion of the hustler fund, when you borrow, you don't get the entire amount, some of it is held back. And he talked about raising, the hustler fund raising 600 million, but somewhere in my notes I can't find over what period. I will Google. But he talked about already the hustler fund savings, you know, and he talked about these reforms to NSSF to enable the same thing. Is Kenya able to generate enough funds for itself without needing to go to foreign donors? Foreign, let me just call them entities.
Okay. So the reason why we save to invest. So what the president was saying is that Kenyans need to save in order to invest, to create businesses in future. But during the same interview, the president indicated that majority of Kenyans spend at least 52% of their income on food alone. So I'm wondering, if we are already spending 52% of our income on food alone, we still have some expenditure items to take care of. So will we be able to save in the current situation of the economy? Saving is good, but I don't think, as things are right now, majority of Kenyans can save. So maybe we need to increase the size of the national pie. We need to develop, and when majority of Kenyans realize improvement in terms of their income, that is when they'll be left with something to save. Yes. So as things are right now, only a few Kenyans can save and invest. Okay, let me take you back a bit. We've been talking about raising revenue from taxes, but then we also have non-tax revenue sources in Kenya, which has been doing very poorly compared to other African countries. Actually, we raise less than 5% from of our total revenue from the non-tax revenue. So the main reason why this has been performing poorly is because it's largely manual. So
wait, when you talked about, okay, so sorry, like I know I should have had like a glossary of definitions, but when you talk about non-tax revenue, are you talking about things like government bonds or securities or things like that?
These are government.
What are you making reference to when you talk about non-tax revenue?
Non-tax revenue are fines, for example, from courts, royalties, and if you look at the case of the courts and even police bonds, it's largely manual. So this also needs to be digitized. If it is digitized, we'll be able to raise enough revenue from these other sources. because Kenya, we raise less than 5% of our total revenue from non-tax revenue. If you compare with other African countries, or the average for Africa is at least 30% from the non-tax revenue. Okay. So it means that this has really been underperforming, and it needs to be checked. And the only way out of it is to automate it.
So this is essentially a consequence of corruption, is it not?
Yes.
All right. Yes. Professor Exen Iraki, when we had the National Taxpayers Day, some of these figures the president was giving on the 4th of January were not new necessarily. He gave KRA targets, you know, and he said, just as you're taking notes, he said he was glad the commissioner, it's called the Commissioner General, it was also taking notes. And so he set a target of, if I can just scroll through here, our poster, of $1 trillion, an extra $1 trillion. In 24 months, and you're talking about in the next 5 years. Did you talk about 2 trillion in the next 5 years? Double, right? Yeah. So how realistic is this target? Because Irene talked about perhaps the KRA should have provided some pushback, if I recall your contribution correctly.
I think before I answer that question, I need to go back to the savings rate. Mm-hmm. Because the president and the other Kenyans believe we don't save enough. But you can only save what you have. So if you are going to save money, you must be having money. And it takes back to where we were before. That before you tell us to save, show us how to make money. And it so happens that the more money you have, the more you can save. So again, we need to grow the economy. We need to grow the economy so that people have income. And they can think of, one, they pay taxes, they cover their expenses, and they save. So as long as you're getting very little money, very little income, you're not going to save. Back to your question about the target. In my opinion, it's quite ambitious. If you look at the growth rate of the economy, there was projection that we are going to grow below 5%. If things did not go bad last year, like drought and so on, we could have hit about 6%. So looking at the current economic growth rate, I think we are being ambitious. And number two, why we are ambitious is, where is that money going to come from? Are we getting more taxpayers? Are we getting more enterprises that are expanding so that we tax them? So looking at the current circumstances, I don't see us hitting that target. But I think the best approach would be to reduce the waste. If we reduce the waste, I think we can hit that target. Because let's not look at more revenue in terms of getting money from people, but also in terms of reducing the costs. We have talked about digitization, and there are a lot of services that we can, for example, merge together. We can combine departments despite the political cost and reduce the costs. So if we are going to hit that target, let's look at it like a pair of scissors. The two blades must move. So raise revenue this side, but reduce cost also on this side.
That's an interesting analogy. Really brought it home for me, at least, because now I can picture those scissors snipping away. Eric, do you agree with Professor Exen Iraki that this target may be ambitious?
Yes, in fact, for a number of years, KRA has not been meeting their target, and every year the target keeps on increasing. The question then is, if you compare the GDP, the Kenyan GDP has not been growing for a number of years, so how do you then expect KRA to correct more? That's the question that a number of people have been asking. The other thing is that
you're saying the Kenyan GDP has not been
growing, for a number of years. Yeah, the growth has been maybe minimal. So the other question then has been that KRA needs to be supported, and that's why then KRA has been maybe asking for more funds so that then they can digitize some of their systems. Like now we have seen a number of systems being digitized. We have seen integrated customs management systems we have seen tax management invoice system teams, which came into effect on 1st of December 2022. And that's the way to go. Like now, the electronic tax invoice, if it's well implemented, then it can assist KRA to, do away with some of the fictitious input tax claims some of the players or dodgy players are claiming. And also it can also eliminate or reduce this issue of a refund, VAT refund from KRA, which are ballooning every time. And the KRA is not able to refund.
But I did see something about that in the Finance Act as well.
Yeah, there was.
Yes.
So basically what happened is that KRA was given 90 days so that if one lodges a refund application and then they do not audit and confirm that that refund, that amount is refundable, it will be deemed that KRA has agreed that that amount is refundable and the taxpayer needs to get that money. So in fact, currently KRA they are having a lot of challenge because the number of refund applications that have been made by Kenyans are increasing, and there are too many, and they do not have capacity to verify some of these applications. So if we then the electronic tax invoice, then it's going to address some of these challenges, because unlike the current state where KRA has to come, you are asked to produce documents to support your input, incurrence of input tax, right? And then they audit, and then they move to another taxpayer to audit. The electronic tax invoice system, what is going to do is going to address that challenge so that all transactions are digitally captured, because when somebody is selling to you, the information is ready to KRA database. So later on when you are claiming the input tax and later on when you are claiming VAT refund, KRA does not need to come and carry out an audit. And this is what we are seeing in a number of revenue authorities across Africa. Uganda is one of them. Ghana Revenue Authority has also moved that direction. Rwanda Revenue Authority is that direction. Malawi, Zambia, a number of revenue authorities. So the key is that KRA needs to be supported, and KRA needs to digitize some of their systems so that then it eliminates some of these challenges that we are currently seeing. But to answer your point, it's an ambitious kind of goal or program. I don't see KRA raising this kind of money unless KRA gets the kind of support it requires, and even the government to provide an enabling environment. If you see some of the traders, like now the one who are operating around Ngong Road, selling furniture, even the one operating in Gikomba and those areas, they need to be supported so that, and the kind of support we envisage is that we expect the government to provide perhaps some of the stores those guys are using, so that we do not experience some of the fire we have seen in Gikomba. So that when you go back to ask that person, that trader, to pay you taxes, then they are willing to pay. But we have seen a number of instances where their wares are gutted down by fire, and then they don't have a fallback plan. But if the government can provide an enabling environment by providing even, or by even acquiring that land, and then they make stores or elect stores which can host those guys, then they can be willing to pay. But you can't, they can't be experiencing what they are experiencing, and then now you want to collect taxes from them.
All right. Mike is my director. Mike Wainaina. Mike, what is my out time? I need to do just some quick calculation. All right. So I'll give us in a minute each concluding remarks. If you were to get the ear of the president for a minute, you know, he's having given these ambitious targets, what would be your counsel to him? And I'll start with you, Irene, in a minute each.
I think if I had that opportunity, one would be to tell the President of Kenya that there's a lot of goodwill from Kenyan taxpayers by paying tax, and we have seen it going up. What we request the government, and rather what we ask our government, is to match that goodwill with provision of essential public services. I think for me that is the bottom line. Match taxation and provision of public service delivery. He would be able to net in the additional tax. Equally, just to let tell the government that taxation is just not about raising revenue. So tax has more than 4 functions. So redistribution. We want to see a bit more equity between people in formal employment and informal, because we are now moving to the informal to be able to bring the additional taxes looking at. So issues of equity, redistribution, and issues of accountability must be attached to this conversation of increased revenue.
All right. Dr. Mundi?
Okay, so I would tell the president that the tax targets are achievable, but it requires time to to realize that, and also to focus on curbing tax evasion, improve efficiency of tax administration, and also grow the economy so that Kenyans can be able to save.
All right, that was very efficient. Professor Exen Iraki.
The starting point would be we need to change the view on why we pay taxes. One of the ways you become a shareholder of this country is because you vote. And number two is because you pay taxes. And if Kenyans had more pride in their country by voting and paying taxes, collecting taxes would not be a problem. Number two, I would tell KRA to start treating taxpayers like VIPs. Treat them very well. I've always given an example of a farmer. If you play music to a cow, you get more milk, not just feeding it. So KRA should do that. And then number three is we should have prompt refunds. I remember I lived in another country, and anytime I paid my taxes, on that day, I would get my tax refunds if overpaid. Because when you give people money, they don't keep it in the pocket, they spend it, and that stimulates the economy. And I think finally, we need to start seeing, we need to think of tax as a burden for everybody. Because if all paid taxes, the tax burden will be shared. So whether in formal sector, whether in the formal sector, whether you are rich, whether you are poor, all of us should pay taxes. But the ultimate advice I would give him is make this economy very conducive to grow. Let's change the rules. Let's change the regulations. Let's make everybody work hard and be rewarded for hard work. The economy will grow, we get more taxes. We shall even start lending money to other countries, the same way we get money from China or other countries.
Okay.
That is my dream, that one day Kenya will be lending people money, the same way we get money from other countries. And that should happen in my lifetime.
All right, amen, amen to that. All right, Eric, looks like you'll have the last word on this subject.
Yeah, basically what I would tell the president is that we need to support KRA, and also we need to institute austerity measures. But to Professor Ilaki's point on KRA, I want to come to the defense of KRA. Having interacted with them, my work basically entails interacting with KRA and a number of revenue authorities in Africa. I can authoritatively say that KRA has made significant strides to make our tax administration more bearable to taxpayers. If you compare it with some of the countries' tax authorities, when you visit those countries or the tax authorities, you don't get what you get in KRA. So, of course, there's room for improvement, and we expect KRA to continue that on that trajectory. But if I compare KRA of 10 years ago and KRA of today, I must affirm that there's a lot of improvement on the side of KRA.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I want to thank my panel this morning for lending us their expertise. You know, I mean, this is a subject which involves usually a lot of jargon. So I want to appreciate the fact that you have, you know, brought it down to the layman level that we can all follow along with the conversation. And here are my VIPs. Professor Exen Iraki spoke about KRA treating the taxpayers as VIPs. I want to treat you like VIPs this morning, Professor Exen.
You give us some tea.
Exen Iraki, economist Dr. Francis Owundi, economist as well. We have Irene Otieno, National Coordinator at the National Taxpayers Association. And we have Eric Misiani, Regional Tax Manager Africa at SMEC International, and yourself for taking the time this morning to also take part in the conversation. My name is Olive Burrows. It has been a pleasure.